Pay. I think a lot of people would be like, well, you should probably work with enterprise companies because, they've raised $480 million and they're publicly traded. Clearly, they're going to pay you $1 million to write copy. I can say from my experience, that's not the case necessarily. I don't know if you have experience with this. I can
I
go
think there's
deeper,
a
but
bit of a correlation that like companies with more money will pay more, but like
mm-hmm.
it doesn't extend as it's not as strong of a correlation as you might think. And there are
Yeah,
plenty of situations where, you know, the startup is like, okay, like we're hiring this person to write like, a quarter of all of our copy or the copy that's going to be responsible for like, if you're a startup and you're going to write the website copy, like that's a huge deal for that company. Whereas for an enterprise, you might be coming in for like a campaign of some sort. And
yeah,
that's, you're 5 levels disconnected from the VP of marketing. And this is kind of like a box that they're trying to check and just get something out the door. So, it for me, it can go either way.
yep, yeah. So I've worked with some enterprise clients, and they pay well. I mean, there's been plenty of enterprise clients that I've not worked with because they weren't going to pay well. So I guess I've got a bit of a bias there. But you do end up working really hard for that money. And we can talk about that a little bit. But one thing that I think people need to be aware of is when you're working with a large enterprise company, there's a very good chance, and you kind of touched on it, that you're not going to be speaking to the founder or someone in the C suite or even a VP. It might be like a director or like a marketing or growth manager. And when that happens, you have to think about the mindset. And this is someone who's still fairly junior. They've got a budget, and their job is to really mind that budget. And they're thinking a little bit less about the big picture, like the ROI and like how much is this going to help the company grow. They're just like, I've got some boxes to tick and I've got some budget here, and they like it when I don't blow through my budget halfway through the year. So I'm going to find someone who can do a good enough job and is fairly cheap. And the other thing that I suspect we might run into is when you're dealing with someone who in theory should probably be able to do what you do, or they think they should be able to do what you do, you're a threat. And then all of a sudden you're coming in and you're kind of doing their job for them. And if you do it better, that's not going to look very good. So then that makes them even want to go towards the cheaper side even more, because now they've got the budget and no threat. So that's a problem. And so I think it's really important when you're dealing with a enterprise client that when it comes time to talk money, that you're talking to somebody who is high enough up that they're thinking about things like ROI. They're not threatened by your rates. They're not comparing your rates to their salary, because they're like, wow, this guy's going to do a project for us and make 50% of what I make in a year. Like, that doesn't seem nice,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
talking to like, I rarely have luck with someone director or below. It's usually got to be VP or C-suite when it comes time to talk like scope and money, because their mindset is just very different. They're thinking about numbers very differently, and yeah, so I think that's
And time and
super key.
the timeline too. Like as
Yeah,
you said, with like the kind of like box to check, like the manager is thinking about, what are they going to tell their boss, in their next one-on-one, and what's going to happen 6 months or a year from now. If you're
yep,
talking to the CMO who of a startup who has equity, or the founder even who owns the company or whatever it is, they're thinking about 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And during that sales process, if you get good at, kind of bringing that like value into the conversation, then, you can sell a much bigger, you can sell something much bigger to someone who's thinking 3 years down the line and saying, like, okay, like if we hit the results that you want, what is that going to mean for you a year from now? What's that going to mean for you 2 years from now? And that's a much more compelling story than someone who's like, I need to tell my boss next week that we hired someone to write the website copy. And, I hope that 6 months from now, when it's done, we have something that everyone on my team recognizes as better than it was before, or that, so yeah, I think it comes back to what we were talking about with agencies about, you're selling something different to someone who actually will get the value that you're delivering versus someone who's trying to buy something that is not necessarily about value, or they are valuing something that isn't about the business result and is more something political or social or some sort of short-term concern.
Yep, for sure. And one way I think about this, it works for both startups and enterprise companies, is if a company reaches out to you, one of the first things that I do is I look them up online to see like if they've raised money, right? Crunchbase is a good place for this. Otherwise, you
Yep.
can find announcements. They always announce it. And so if I see that, they've raised 20 million, or if they're an enterprise company and they've raised $300 million, or they're publicly traded and they're balking at my rates, that means I'm speaking to the wrong person, or I'm not communicating my value well enough, because they have money. They have the money.
Right.
They can, like, paying five figures for a project that's going to move the needle for a company of that size is really nothing. But if you're getting no's, yeah, you're talking to the wrong person, or you're just not communicating your value well enough compared to anyone else they might be speaking to.
Yeah, I had that reminds me, I had someone from like a well-known company reach out to me on LinkedIn to ask about, availability and stuff like that. But I look at like their title and it's like it wasn't necessarily because of, how, but it's like, there's sort of this like it's like content and something else, and I just sort of know from experience that um right, it's like what you said, like there's someone in the organization that will get it and will understand the value and will greenlight that. It's probably not going to be the content manager
Right. Yeah. It never is.
for an enterprise.
Yep.
So yeah, and navigating your way through that sale. Sometimes in a startup, it's the marketing intern or something might reach out, but it's kind of easier to say like, hey, let's loop your boss in and have them join us on this call. And it's easier to navigate your way to that person with a startup, whereas with an enterprise, if the marketing intern reaches out to you, good luck getting to the VP
Yeah.
of marketing.
Yeah, for sure. It's not going to happen. For sure. So yeah, I think it's wrong to assume that enterprise clients are just going to automatically write you a blank check because they have so much money, but there are ways to get to that point where you can ask for more. And I would say it's not worth working with an enterprise company unless you can ask and get more, because and I'll talk about some of the other pieces, but like it's always just more difficult to work with an enterprise client. There's no way around it. Even if they're an awesome bunch, it's a beast to work with an enterprise client.